Welcome back to another episode of the Cinema Scoop podcast with Sam and Jordan. Today we are talking, Sam is mostly talking about the first decade of Disney owning the Star Wars franchise.
So it's been since 2014, 2015, about 10 years since they started making a Disney-owned Star Wars movies and shows. So I wanted to go back and give a timeline of how everything transpired and where we currently are with projects that have been abandoned or canceled, and then projects that are currently in production or potentially in production. This is going to come out in early August 2024. And I think there's a D3 Expo this month where they might announce one or two things related to Star Wars, but this is kind of before that. So if anything new happens in the next month or so, this wouldn't wouldn't cover that. But so obviously, I'm sure you know most of these that have come out. So basically, they decided to start with episode 7 and continue what they call the Skywalker saga and do 3 movies and basically make a sequel trilogy. So episode 7, 8, and 9. They had this idea that in between each episode, which would be every 2 years, they would have this thing called a Star Wars story, which are spin-offs of the Skywalker saga. So those would be Rogue One and the Han Solo movie just called Solo. So those were the only 5 films in the first 10 years of them having the rights to Star Wars. And just a quick breakdown of the MCU, they came out with 24 MCU movies during that time. So 5 Star Wars, 24 MCU. So a lot of people put Star Wars and Marvel in the same entertainment bucket of content, but it's actually way more. It's literally over 4 times, almost 5 times as many Marvel movies as Star Wars movies. And then as far as the TV shows, I won't get too much into those. They have The Mandalorian, which is the only show currently that has multiple seasons, which has 3 seasons. Then they had a 7-episode of The Book of Boba Fett, a 6-episode miniseries of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Then they have Andor, which has 12 episodes, but there will be a second season of Andor that comes up in 2025. Then there's the Ahsoka show, which has 8 episodes, and there's a source that says they're planning on a second season, but no date on that. And then the Acolyte, which just premiered this year, has 8 episodes, and there's one more show starting December 2024 called The Skeleton Crew, which is a family adventure starring Jude Law. So those are all the live action shows that have come out. And so again, it's been 10 years. They did the sequel trilogy, and really, I think if you take anything away from this podcast, it's that Disney kind of approached this in a chaotic way and never really had a solid plan. I feel like the diehard Star Wars fans, for the most part, are probably anti what Disney has done. And even though I would say I like a little more than half of what they've done, it's been mildly disappointing. And I think the bigger thing is there's nothing to look forward to, which is what I'm going to get at the end, is there's not really anything exciting Star Wars. Like, I liked most of the sequel trilogy. I like The Mandalorian, and we'll get to that, but there's not a specific character or arc or story that I'm eager or waiting for them to do. I mean, we'll get into these, but basically the first mistake I feel like Disney made was they hired J.J. Abrams to do The Force Awakens, but only The Force Awakens, and they decided to hire a different filmmaker for each movie. So then they hired Rian Johnson to do Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and then they hired Colin Trevorrow to do Episode 9. After The Last Jedi came out, and it was kind of like, yeah, to say the least, they kind of went back and disagreed with Colin Trevorrow's script called Duel of the Fates, and they went back to J.J. Abrams to do the 9th movie, The Rise of Skywalker. And I think most people would say that there's elements of Rise of Skywalker that you could say are better than Last Jedi, but ultimately the way the whole story of these 9 episodes ends is really bad, with them bringing back Palpatine for no reason. And
yeah,
it was overall disappointing. And so the spin-off movies with Rogue One and Solo, I really like Rogue One, and then I rewatched Solo, and it's just not that good. The actors that were signed on for the first movie, their contracts had in them to do multiple films. And because it didn't make a lot of money and wasn't well received, they never made a sequel to Solo, which we'll get to. So that's kind of like the full-on first 10 years of what they did. So now I want to get into what was abandoned, because I think that's more interesting, or it's more like crazy, because So they've done 5 movies. They have 11 plus that they have said they might do or were going to do, and it got canceled for whatever reason. And all this is on Wikipedia for the most part, and I don't have full sources or details as of some of these, but the first one, like I said, was episode 9, originally supposed to be written by Colin Trevorrow, called The Duel of the Fates. Had a completely different ending, no emperor. There's leaked plot details online if you want to look it up, but it's actually kind of interesting.
Do you think it would have been better?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a perfect plot that I heard or read, but it at least was better than what Rise of Skywalker ended up being.
Yeah.
So there's 2 other movies that were originally Disney bought the rights in late 2012, and it wasn't until 2014 when they officially started slating movies. And so I think it was either a few months before Force Awakens came out in 2015 when they were doing a Star Wars Celebration convention, and they were going to announce these 2 standalone movies, the Josh Trank Boba Fett movie, and then a Yoda standalone film was also going to be announced, but they backtracked, and part of it was with the Boba Fett movie was Josh Trank directed the Fantastic Four movie with Miles Teller.
Fan Four Stick.
And it was not good, and so they kind of took it back. And then in 2018, so this is now the 4th movie that they abandoned, they were going to give James Mangold the Boba Fett movie in 2018 before he did the Ford versus Ferrari movie. Because in 2017, James Mangold directed the Logan R-rated Hugh Jackman movie, which is kind of like the Hugh Jackman Wolverine send-off, but now he's in the Deadpool movie. But anyway, Logan was 2017, so the next year they basically offered James Mangold to do the Boba Fett movie. And again, I don't know the full details of why most of these stopped happening, but basically that fell through. Then number 5 would be they didn't have a solo sequel, even though they were thinking about it. Number 6, Obi-Wan was going to be a movie, but they decided to make it a TV show, so that kind of counts and doesn't count. This next one, number 7, this one, so in 2019, I'm trying to do this in chronological order too. So 2019, coming off of Game of Thrones, the Benioff and Weiss duo, along with Rian Johnson, who did episode 8, were planning the next decade of films in general. Originally, they were going to give Benioff and Weiss a trilogy or potentially a TV show. Again, this is from 2019. This was all going to come out in 2022. But eventually, Benioff and Weiss signed a deal with Netflix to eventually do the 3 Body Problem show, which I have not seen. This kind of made them less accessible, and either they had a bad relationship with Disney or they just decided to not pursue Star Wars anymore. But basically, by 2022, there was no more of this. So this could be 1 movie, it could be 3. There are reports that it could have been The Origin of the Jedi, which I'll get back to in a little bit. So the 8th film, at least, that has been abandoned by Disney in 10 years, in 2019, they were going to start production on Knights of the Old Republic movie based on the 2003 video game. That one didn't have any actual directors or people attached to it, but it was at least heavily discussed that they were going to do that. Again, in 2019, kind of post the Avengers movies, Kevin Feige, who produced those, was in line to produce a Star Wars movie, and these are quotes. In 2022, so 3 years after that was first announced, 3 years later, Disney said, "We are moving forward." Last year, 2023, they said, quote, "No longer in development." And I think another key thing to point out with all these is it's not that I'm doing mild research, I was digging into a lot of this. I'm just trying to briefly paraphrase a lot of it, but most of it's very vague, very sudden. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
It's almost like they announce projects to get a sense of whether or not people will be interested in it, to then cancel it if it gets negative backlash or bad press or nobody cares about it.
Yeah, like they just don't follow through with anything. And
Yeah.
so when I get to the movies that are currently quote in production, um, I don't know if half of them are even going to actually happen. So there's a few more that are officially. So these are the ones that are officially not happening, right? So this is now number 10. So in 2020, they had a mild agreement with this guy J.D. Dillard, who directed Devotion, which is the airplane movie with Glenn Powell and Jonathan Majors that we haven't seen, but it came out a few years ago. He was going to make a movie about the Sith planet Exegol, which appears in The Rise of Skywalker. And it was also going to be loosely based off the TIE Fighter video game, which is like one of the OG 1990s crappy video games that was actually pretty good. I never really played it, but I've heard it's a good video game. And they had the writer of Luke Cage, which is a Marvel Disney Plus show, was also attached. So 2020, they didn't like publicly announce that this was going to happen, but it was like in the trades of Hollywood that it was potentially going to happen. But 2022, quote, they're no longer involved, so it's like not happening. And then the last one I'll mention is 2023. So literally last year, there was a lot of talk that Guillermo del Toro would direct a Jabba the Hutt movie, and that has since washed away and not happening, which is very sad. And then they actually have only abandoned one show, which was going to be called Rangers of the New Republic. This was going to be a spinoff of The Mandalorian, which I'm about to get to, but starring this actress Gina Carano, who in late 2020, early 2021 became a super MAGA person and was like publicly announcing stuff that Disney was doing, and they basically broke ties with her and scrapped the show. So that was kind of more of a specific actor issue than anything. Okay, so those were all the projects abandoned and canceled. So now we're looking for the future. There's currently 9 films that are potentially happening. So again, they've made 5, they've canceled over 11, and now they're trying to make 9 in production. So it's completely out of control. So the first one is, and this is the only one that has a date, is The Mandalorian and Grogu, coming out in May 2026. So this is still almost 2 years away.
So this is based on the TV show.
Yeah, so originally they were going to make a 4th season of The Mandalorian, but now it's up in the air as if there will be a 4th season and it's going to be right before or right after the movie, or if there's not a 4th season and there's just a standalone movie. So already it's confusing. And I'll be like, I love The Mandalorian and Grogu and Baby Yoda. I'm not going to really say Grogu because he's Baby Yoda, even though he's not really Yoda's baby or a baby version of Yoda. But
he's Baby Yoda in everyone's hearts.
I like that show as much as anyone, but I'm done with it. Like, I don't need more. And like 24 episodes and 3 seasons, and they were in half of the Book of Boba Fett as well. Like, I'm good. Like, I don't know, like, I'm sure it'll be fine, but so out of everything that you can imagine and all the things that have been canceled, the only thing that is currently on the calendar is this movie, which I think is insane. And if it actually comes out in 2026, that would be 7 full years since Rise of Skywalker came out, or 6.5. But the only other film out of these next 8 that seemingly is actually in production is going to be directed by this lady called, and I would have butchered the name, but it's Sharmeen Obadid Chinoy. So she was the showrunner of the Miss Marvel Disney Plus show. And the only thing about this movie is that Daisy Ridley will return as Rey, and that's kind of like the only caveat to this film. I've heard a lot about it going back and forth from either them saying if they want to make this episode 10, or if they just want to make this a Rey standalone movie, or if they want to make this a completely different thing, and this is just the first film and Rey's more of a side character than the main character. So there's really like a lot of ways it can go with this movie. And the only thing that I keep seeing online about it is that they either are rewriting the script a lot or they're changing scripts, but this director lady has stayed consistently the director, which is kind of different from other films they've done, like Episode 9 changed directors, the Boba Fett thing changed directors twice, and then they just made it a TV show.
It's like they'll take a concept, typically, they'll take a concept and then it gets passed around to different directors. That's not atypical even from the original Star Wars films. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they were even, at one point, fun fact, talking to David Lynch about doing Star Wars movies. Like, that's kind of the Star Wars way, like idea first, then find a director. That's what's weird about this one, is that it's like director is married to the project almost.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much she has to do with the script in that one. And again, it's not dated, so A, it might not happen. B, it sounds like December 26th at the absolute earliest, but probably 2027. So again, that's 3 more years, so who knows? Usually it takes about 3 years to make a big movie, so it's not like it's out of character for that to be. But just again, it's been 2019 since the Star Wars movie, so... So there's 7 more that are currently in development, but it's, again, none of them have release dates, and depending on who you talk to or what you read, it might be canceled or it might be on the up and up. So, like, take all this with a grain of salt. But so one of them is by Dave Filoni, who's like the head canon guy at Star Wars. He was very hands-on with the Clone Wars TV show with George Lucas in the 2000s, and he's kind of taken the baton from George Lucas about everything canon. So for him to get a live action movie is actually a big deal. And the only thing that they've said about it is that it's supposed to connect the stories of all the post Return of the Jedi TV shows, so like The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and the Ahsoka show. The second film in development is, again, a James Mangold movie. Again, he was going to make the Boba Fett film, but eventually that didn't happen. So now I think there's rumors that it's going to be about the origin of the Force 25,000 years before New Hope. And then unofficially, they say it's called Dawn of the Jedi, so who knows about that. James Mangold is currently filming the Bob Dylan movie with Timothée Chalamet. So there's rumors that after that's over, he might do the Star Wars movie, but also he's in line with DC to make a Swamp Thing movie. So there's a chance that he makes a Swamp Thing movie and then does the Star Wars movie. So it's really insane how all this works out. But this also could be the Benioff and Weiss movie or show idea about the origin of the Force, and just it's from James Mangold. So the third one is, or the next one is by Sean Levy, who just directed Deadpool and Wolverine. And I think they were starting production on whichever film that was going to be, but then all I read was that the 2023 writer's strike and actor's strike kind of stalled production, and then he went all in on Deadpool 3. So again, now that Deadpool 3 is out of theaters, he might move on to do Star Wars next, who knows. So then there's the Rian Johnson trilogy. So after he made The Last Jedi, he had an agreement with Disney that he would make a trilogy of films. And even though half the people who watch Last Jedi have a panic attack and tantrum about it, he's still in line to make 3 more Star Wars movies. Now, the caveat here is that he decided to do Glass Onion and now a third Knives Out movie before he moves on to Star Wars. So Glass Onion came out, I think, 2 years ago. And then I think this third Knives Out movie comes out next year. I'm not sure on that, but it is in production. So there's a chance that by 2025, 2026, Rian Johnson is all in on Star Wars again, but who knows? This one is kind of funny. So in 2020, Disney announced that they had agreed with Taika Waititi to make a Star Wars movie. And he did Thor, Love and Thunder, and Thor Ragnarok. So he's done 2 Thor movies. So they announced that 4 years later, not a peep about it at all. So again, a lot of these, there's at least a little bit of a little bit of news about it's canceled or it's going to happen after maybe this movie. But since 2020, there's been no news about if not, there's going to be a Taika Waititi Star Wars movie. So the last 2 that are currently in production, there's a Lando movie, which originally was going to be a TV show. Um, Donald Glover reprising his role as Lando. He was in the Solo film, but the latest about this is that it's going to be a movie and it is still in production, and that Donald Glover with his brother who wrote the TV show Atlanta will be writing this movie.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have the Patty Jenkins film Rogue Squadron. This one was the first announced many years ago, right after she did Wonder Woman, and then she did Wonder Woman 2. And then she was slated to do Wonder Woman 3, but that got canceled because Wonder Woman 2 didn't do well. And Patty Jenkins was also slated to make a Cleopatra movie with Gal Gadot. So it's unclear if she's going to do that Cleopatra movie or if she's potentially deep in production with Rogue Squadron as we speak. But this was going to be basically an X-Wing fighter pilot type movie. So yeah, that's all the films that are currently possibly coming out in the future. And just to recap, so over 10 years, they came out with 5 films, and we are in a current 6-year plus gap between movies. They've made 7 TV shows / miniseries, but only one of them currently has multiple seasons. And with 10 years down, they've abandoned well over 10 films, so more than one a year they've abandoned. And in the future, there's really only 2 films that you could say are probably coming out, and there's 7 more that may happen or may not. So I think, in conclusion, the first 10 years of Disney Star Wars has been an objective mild failure, but not
a clusterfuck,
not a disaster, because I do like about half of what they've done, but there's a chaotic organization about it, and there's no clear cohesive plan, and that obviously makes the quality of work less. And I think episode 9 is the biggest casualty in all this, and I think that kind of handicapped them into what they could potentially do with episode 10, or when they want to start episode 10, or if they even want to do an episode 10. But there's nothing that's I'm hopeful they do this, or I wish they would do this. And as much as I don't really care about the MCU, and I don't really care that Robert Downey Jr. is going to be Doctor Doom and going to be in 2 more Avengers films, and they'll bring in the X-Men or the Fantastic Four, I will probably eventually see that. But at least that's something, and
it's a cohesive plan.
It's an idea that I don't think is good, but at least it's an idea, whereas Star Wars has no idea what they're doing. And like you said, I think a lot of it is, since The Last Jedi, they've just been very hesitant on going all in on either an idea or a story.
Or a director, for that matter.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads us to the next segment, where we're going to talk about the Acolyte.
Well, I have a question before we move on. I have a couple of just off the dome questions about Star Wars. As the biggest Star Wars fan that I know, in your humble opinion, in your personal opinion, do we need any more Star Wars movies?
I say yes, but with a big caveat that they're fully planned out by either a small set of people.
Like a committee.
Yeah, I don't need any more Skywalker stuff. I honestly don't need another Rey movie, or I don't need to see episode 10 to be, Rey's training Jedi now, and now there's another bad guy with the red lightsaber. I'd rather them do something which they might end up doing with the James Mangold film, where they go way back in time and they have characters discover the Force. And we'll kind of talk about the Acolyte in that sense, or at least it is before the prequels. I just think doing anything even just spin-off films of characters we know, I'm just over it. I don't need a Yoda movie. I don't need a Chewbacca movie. I don't really need a Lando movie that we talked about. I'm over the Mandalorian. They need to try more things, and I don't think that they're really doing that.
I feel like they are hesitant to develop lore with new characters without having somebody come back from something that's a well-known character or looks like the baby version of a well-known character. I feel like they don't want to do any of that because it's we don't know if people will like this. There always has to be a cutesy character or a cutesy creature of some kind that can be marketed as a doll. Like, they're always, it's very formulaic in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, Disney did what they did to Marvel, which is kind of sterilize it and make it more mass consumable.
Yeah.
And like, if you think about Star Wars, like not even getting into specifics of plots, it's like there's always a droid, there's always a cute little creature.
And that the whole reason they made Ewoks to begin with.
Well, yeah, they wanted to have a society of like forest. They wanted them to be Wookiees originally in the Return of the Jedi. But yeah, the Ewoks became like the cute thing the kids liked.
Which ended up becoming Porgs.
Porgs, yeah. Then the prequels didn't have too much. I mean, they had more like
they were trying
the slapstick type stuff.
They were trying Jar Jar.
Yeah,
that failed.
Well, I think
did it?
Well, that's debatable. But I think ultimately they need to just let someone like Araya Johnson or James Mangold or this other lady doing a potential movie. They just need to let them cook, and maybe it's a B- movie, but at least it'll be more interesting than just like, oh, here's Yoda again over here, and
yeah,
this guy might be Luke Skywalker's great-great-grandson.
It's like, we don't actually care about that.
Yeah. What was another question? Yeah.
Another question I have is, how do you feel about, like, and this kind of leads right into talking about the Acolyte, which I would say if you want to see the Acolyte and you don't want it to be spoiled for you, maybe just like tune out now. But if you aren't going to see the Acolyte, or you are going to see it and you don't care about being spoiled, like, you can keep listening. How do you feel about the trope of like Star Wars always just randomly introducing a character that's already existed? I know I just kind of talked about that, but like at the end of the Acolyte, it's literally like, there's Yoda.
Yeah.
And like they do it in every freaking movie and TV show at this point. It's like, it's predictable. I'm not even going to say I hate it. It's just like, it's to be expected at this point.
Yeah, what it is, it's like a very quick, vapid nostalgia play. And immediately, the millisecond you see Yoda, you kind of like are, oh yeah, I like Yoda. But you're not like thinking that. It's just like a millisecond feeling that people would feel. But then it goes away, and it's like, well, what's the context behind this?
I don't even feel that way about it. Like, oh yay, it's Yoda. Oh yay, there's Han Solo again. Like, I don't even feel that way about it. I just feel like, oh, brother, here we go.
I know, but I think that's what they're trying to do, is to pull every last string they can and milk all the original characters as long as they can, because that's kind of the whole overview of everything I've said, is like the future of Star Wars as of right now is another Mandalorian Baby Yoda content, which is the only good thing they've created. Technically, I mean, the sequels are kind of separate because it's like, if you're not going to make a character from that spin-off movie or go into episode 10, it's kind of like pointless whether you like the sequels or not. It's like,
the sequels,
you can't really make something more out of that except like a TV show. But as far as like them doing a movie about the Mandalorian, like I feel like it's obviously, I feel like it's not necessary, but I think it's kind of also a desperate, like, this should work and people like this.
Yeah.
But what's the story? Like, what's the context? Like, I know I've seen the first 3 seasons. Will everyone have to see the first 3 seasons to watch this movie to understand?
Yeah. It starts becoming like MCU, where it's like, you don't understand what's going on unless you've seen all of the films that came before it. And like, the average moviegoer doesn't necessarily want to have to bank a ton of lore to like understand what's canon and what's not. And not the average Star Wars fan is not going to sit there and read books and like understand every TV show, every plot line, every possibility. I mean, the diehards will, of course, but
well, yeah, that's the downfall of Marvel, is by the end of the Infinity War and Endgame, the mass casuals were like, all right, I'm good. And that was kind of what I was. It's like, yeah, a lot of people saw Deadpool 3 this past weekend, but I think overall there's
it's not really like Avengers. Like, I know it's MCU, but it's different because it's almost like an offshoot.
Yeah, so it's
Well,
like,
it should be.
I think there's a limit to what the average moviegoer will take when it comes to having to know lore before the film they're watching. And like for me personally, I'm not going to watch 6+ movies just so I can watch this other movie.
And just so you can earn admittance to the newest one, like, you're going to go through like a mediocre round of what, like 10 to 20 movies, just so that you can be like, now I can know the jokes in this one.
So that's kind of where Disney's issue is, that if they do an episode 10 and it doesn't have Rey and Daisy Ridley, it's like, well, where, like, how far past episode 9 are you going? And like, are you just going to have brand new everything again? Like you did with Force Awakens, even though even Force Awakens, they made it very similar to A New Hope purposefully because they knew it would land and be a positive film, which was the only thing they cared about opening up this whole thing, was to just have a decent movie that wouldn't be, poo-pooed on like the prequels.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be very interesting what they ultimately decide to do, because I think if we fast forward 10 years from now and we do this podcast again in 2034, like, it'll be very interesting to see what they actually did and if they tried in episode 10. Because, when they bought Star Wars in 2012, the first thing they said was, we're making episode 7. And it's just funny that it's been so long. I mean, 6 years isn't too long, but it's been pretty long since, and they haven't even officially said anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready to talk about The Acolyte.
Okay, so The Acolyte, I watched it by myself, and then I rewatched it with Jordan. There's 8 episodes on Disney Plus. The entire runtime is about 4 hours, so you could probably knock it out in 3 days pretty easily. Yeah, I think the first thing that I liked about it is it's set 100 years before the prequels, so it's kind of got its own runway to tell a story. I think ultimately, I think it's like a B- type show. I don't think it was great, but I did like a lot of the things they were trying to do. I really liked the Chimere guy with the helmet. I liked his character, and he was a good actor. Mm-hmm. I thought them, spoiler alert again, but I think them bringing back Plagueis on the island at the end was very interesting. Again, that could lead to a different show or movie, who knows?
But at least it's not like a well-established, beloved character that they insert at random just to gain.
Yeah, that's more of a heart, more deeper fan would know, because he's only mentioned in Revenge of the Sith as Emperor Palpatine's master, and they made a book a few years before Disney bought Star Wars, so it's technically non-canon. But if they don't make a season 2 of The Acolyte, they might do a spin-off show with that character.
But even then, like, watching it as, I would say, a pretty average to high Star Wars fan. I haven't read any of the books. I haven't watched any of like the Clone Wars or any of that. Like, I could kind of tell, like, oh, this is like an old Sith Lord. Like, you don't need to know all of those things to be like, who is this guy? This weird long-faced man. Like, he looks evil. It didn't feel like a shoe-in my opinion.
Yeah, because they established that they're on an unknown planet, and it looks very similar to Octu, which is from Last Jedi and the end of Force Awakens, the planet that Skywalker goes to. But it's actually a different planet, but they don't say what it's actually called. But they say it's basically deserted, so, when he pops up, it's kind of insinuated that he's just in the shadows. But he could just be there watching, or he could be Chimere's master, who knows. I would say one of the bigger problems with the show overall is that there's a lot of times where a character will do or say something, and then it's supposed to like stoke some sort of engagement with the story or what's happening, or it's supposed to make a conflict start, but like 5 or 10 seconds later something else happens and the conflict is over, and it's kind of like, what's the point of that? I thought the main actress was okay. I just think when you have a character or an actor do 2 different sides of a character who's actually the same person, it's kind of difficult. And I think the OSHA part was better than the May part.
Yeah.
But as they were, and maybe this was on purpose because it's kind of supposed to be the same person or the same consciousness in two bodies, which I think is a very interesting concept, but they didn't really go too deep into that.
Yeah.
It was kind of difficult to distinguish which performance was better because they were kind of exactly the same. It was more just like OSHA was more of the main. We spent more time with OSHA, I felt like. But then they also had, the guy from Squid Game as the main Jedi, Soul.
Mm-hmm.
And they had Carrie-Anne Moss, who was in The Matrix as Trinity. She's in this as a green lightsaber Jedi lady.
I actually really enjoyed the show. I wouldn't say it's like the best thing I've seen in forever of Star Wars. I had pretty significant problems with the way that the show ended. It felt like they were just really trying to wrap up the show. It's like they almost needed more episodes, or it just felt very convenient. Some of the tropes at the end where they're just like speed running you through explaining what's going on. But overall, like the things that I really enjoyed about the show, I mean, obviously, huge female cast, like a highly female centric cast of characters. I also really, really liked the lightsaber battles. They were very atypical from what you would see in anything else Star Wars. And
yeah, episode 5 and episode 8 had really good lightsaber battles.
Yeah, and I'm glad that there wasn't lightsaber battles in every episode, but I think my eyes were like glued to the screen the entire episode 5 just because it was batshit crazy. Like it was so good. I was like, oh, okay. Like they're just pulling out the big guns for not guns, lightsabers, but you know what I mean. Like I was like pleasantly surprised with how good the fight scenes were. But yeah, I think like when it comes to doing something that's so like prequel, it's good when you can develop a really good story like this, because that's actually what people want, is for it to not be based off of a Skywalker or based off of a Yoda or based off of a Chewbacca. Like it's a completely separate thing that explains the lore that fits into the general Star Wars lore a bit more, but it doesn't derive itself on being like based on one of your favorite characters' great-great-grandmothers necessarily.
That's why I'm somewhat hopeful that if they do a season 2, it's about multiple characters, which I know it's just called the Acolyte, so it's kind of like, which one is the Acolyte? But there was a decent amount of characters in it, and you take, again, the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda as basically the two characters in that show. The Obi-Wan show is about Obi-Wan. The Boba Fett show is about Boba Fett. Andor is about Andor. Ahsoka is about Ahsoka. This is the only show they've made that's not called about the character in the title. Although I guess the Acolyte is allowed. But I just mean like...
But that concept wasn't like really a thing.
Not really. I mean, there's always been the rule of 2, which is where there's a Sith Master and a Sith Apprentice, and there can never be a third, because as soon as there's a third, the two of them want to overthrow one of the more powerful one. So it's always like a teacher and a student, and eventually the student has to kill the teacher and make his own student. So I think Kyber is trying to earn his Acolyte so that he and the Acolyte can defeat Darth Plagueis potentially in season 2. So like something like that interests me. But it's more like a story or a lore type thing, which I think a lot of the Disney stuff is missing. Because like when you talk about Rogue One and the Andor show, like I liked Rogue One, I liked the Andor character. I started watching the Andor show, and it's a good quality production, but I didn't finish it mostly because it was kind of boring, and that's kind of the issue. Is if you put your focus in production design, you can be deemed like a good content into some aspect, but like they basically double down on a character who is like the 4th most important character in Rogue One, and he dies in Rogue One. So the show is like a timeline a few years before Rogue One. So it's like, okay, we know this guy's going to die in Rogue One. So again, this is a prequel, and you're like, there's only so much they can do, which is the problem with prequels. And I think this Acolyte show is the first one they've made since The Mandalorian where it's like, we actually could have a long track of story here and, in theory, make many seasons of this. Now, it was poorly received by people online. But if they do make a second season, I think there's more opportunities to expand things. Whereas having a Mandalorian film after they've done 3 seasons about this one character, it's like, okay, what else can we do here?
Yeah.
And maybe if they make 3 or 4 seasons of The Acolyte, there's going to be a point where I get to that too. So there's a finite end to all of these type of stories, but I think the smaller box you start off with, the lesser quality or the less excitement you can build up over time.
I overall just like The Acolyte for the fact that it wasn't deriving itself off of any other knowledge you had to have had.
Yeah.
Like you can definitely do
it fresh. You could only have to watch any of the Skywalker movies. You can literally just watch this. That's kind of, that's
what I like about it, is because for the average Star Wars person, I'm not going to know anything about anything. I'm just going to know that I like lightsabers and I like space. That's about it. I don't care if you're the great-great-grandson of so-and-so or the, whatever of so-and. Like, I just don't care about any of that. And I don't think most people actually do. I think it's just like a corporate money grab to assume that people do like that kind of thing.
You don't care that Kiyomandi's age was changed on Wikipedia?
Who the fuck actually cares about that? Like, I get that there's people that care about that, but that's the thing, though, is that, like, let me just put it in perspective. Like, I'm a massive Harry Potter fan, right? If you were to go back and do a prequel movie, not based on a book, and you were to do, like, we're going to talk about where magic even came from, I would be into that. That would be very, very interesting to me. But then if they were like, oh, what's your last name? Oh, it's Riddle. Oh my gosh, she's related to Tom Riddle. Like, I just do not give any shits about. I can't possibly find any shits to give about that. Like, I just do not care. And then at some point, somebody's going to be like, well, technically, by my calculations, Tom Riddle's family tree shows that blah, 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 on like some Harry Potter Wikipedia thing. Like, I'm just not a fedora wearing, like, well, actually type of Star Wars fan. I feel like that's a very small minority of people. And it's like, if you don't even like everything that's being done and you really only like the first 3 movies, like, just stop. Like, what did Drew Gooden say in his one video? If you constantly keep consuming media that you don't like, that is a skill issue.
Yeah.
Same thing here.
Yeah, I feel like there's a small subset of people who just put hate on Star Wars online because it gets the clicks, and that's just where we are as a society on social media. But I would say if you haven't seen it, you should try The Acolyte. If you get past the 3rd episode, you're a true fan because it kind of gets crazy. But episodes 4 and 5 are really good. So if you can get to those, I think you'll appreciate it. And it's, again, you don't have to have prior knowledge, really. So it's easy entry.
Yeah.
But you can't really say that about any of the Marvel stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
thanks for listening.
Bye.